But okay, thank you very much. I'm here talking about breeders, state-of-the-art broiler breeder management. Henk was more focusing on the nutrition, what is very important, but I think management is also very important, and you can make it or break it by management. Feeding management, or general management, but particularly also when you talk about fertility, management is very important, but also how you manage and the behavior of these birds. And I will talk about that, particularly on the first topic, the male to female ratio. It's really about mating behavior, because that's basic of the goal of broiler breeders, producing chickens at the end of the day. That's the most important one. Everyday feeding during the rear, that's very important, I think, but more extreme, and that's so good that I'm a researcher, you know. I can go extreme in the eyes of a lot of people, but it's not that extreme. But feeding twice a day during the rearing phase, it's maybe not that close to you, but I think it's very important and can help the birds, and not only for welfare and behavior, but also in production, reproduction. Then I talk about an adjusted feeding strategies, I called it that. Diluted diets, yesterday mentioned by Tim, I don't know he's in the audience, but by Tim Burnside. I did a collaboration study together with Aviangen, and we go quite extreme with 30% straw pellets. And I'm really thrilled to go further than that. And the last topic is about twice a day feeding during the laying period and split feeding. Okay, the first one, male to female ratio. If you well know, all species, human, chickens, cows, etc., horses, we are here in the city of the horses, when they become older, everything decreased. The activity, when you talk about breeders, mating activity, definitely that increased. You see that here on the graph of COP. When breeders become older, you see less mating activity. Of course, they become older. Sperm quality decreased over time. Sperm penetration, complete matings decreased. And also testicle weight. So everything is decreasing. When you look to broiler breeders while aging, and what are we doing when we look to the male-female ratio, we also decrease the male to female ratio. Okay, that's the practical approach, of course, but it's interesting to think about this. Can we do this in the opposite? So instead of going down, going up, you know, starting low, ending high. That sounds good to me. And I already pointed this out in 2007, and recently I started an experiment on this topic. Starting low, ending high, if you look to the male to female ratio. I run an experiment in, maybe you know the system, of veranda cages. It's a group system, not the floor system, what you know, litter, sleds, laying nest, etc. But it's a group system. You can say it's a cage. It is a cage. And where we tried this out for the first time in my life, that we did the opposite. We start low and high. We run this experiment on a commercial farm between 20 and 60 weeks of age. The good thing of a group system is, the veranda system is, you have groups. 660 females, and so you have replicates, and that's good. Then you can do research, good research. I had 4 cages with control, with the control male percentage, so starting high, ending low, a bit like that. And in the opposite, we had 4 cages doing the opposite, starting low at 4%. This was so extreme. And the idea behind this, I approached the farmer and said, is it okay that we start with 5%? I was a bit nervous about that. And he said to me, Rick, I want to go extreme. And I love that, you know, that farmers have that attitude to help me rethinking, but also have the balls, you know, to do this kind of stuff. I love my farmers in the Netherlands. So we did the opposite. We start with 4, what is very extreme. Still, again, it's extreme. We increased that to 5%, 6%, 7%. You see it in the table. First, we used the original males, and I stole that word from Jorge, the bench, the males from the bench. I love that. They are sitting there, you know, on the bench, doing the game,
They wait there for 10 weeks and then they become active and score. Okay, they mate. I call that scoring. So really the opposite. And of course, I'm a researcher from Northwest Europe. So one of the things is where I'm focusing on is welfare behavior. So first I show you a graph about the mating behavior. There was no difference in courtship behavior. And you know, courtship behavior is attracting the female by the male. Then you have the successful or the non-successful matings. Normally that's correlated to the forced and voluntary matings, but in this case there were no difference. But what I saw in this experiment, with a low percentage of male, I saw more voluntarily mating. Still, it's quite low, because in the opposite, 70% was forced. So 70% of the matings is forced, you know. That is really a topic to think about it. What's going on in broiler breeder houses, you know? And this is in a good situation, you know, but in the other situation, it's 80–90% is forced. Of course, at the end of the day, or at the end of the cycle, the end of the laying period, that will affect female-male interaction. I come later on that. That difference in mating behavior, of course, affects also the feather cover, because you can imagine when there is forced matings, it's rough, it's struggling, the female wants to escape, so that affects feather cover. And you see that in this graph, you know, the lower, the better. Normally the higher is better, but in this case, the lower is better. We do this observation, we check feather cover on different areas of the females, the contact areas of the female, so back, wings, tail, and thigh, and we check that and we give the number, and 0 is perfect, fully bald, fully covered, and 5 is fully bald. And you see they losing feathers. That's really a disadvantage of the ROS. Sorry to say that, but it is. They're losing feathers rapidly. But I saw a difference, and 0.5 difference, that's good. That's really good. You have really a better feather cover. But the most important part, of course, is, again, I said that for broiler breeders, is fertility, hatchability, chicks at the end of the day. So in science, in research, I always use true fertility. So we also take into account the embryonic mortality, because also these eggs were fertilized. And you see here, and to be honest, the first time when I went to the farm and checked the fertility, hatchability, incubation traits, embryonic mortality, I was really nervous, you know. But there was no difference. So we started 4% at 20 weeks of age, compared to 7%, no difference in fertility. That's really a signal, you know. But also the good thing was, from 49 weeks onwards, the fertility, the true fertility was higher in the groups where we start low, with a low male to female percentage, and ending higher. So there was a nice effect. This is also a very interesting topic, everyday feeding rear. We did that in the Netherlands, in Europe many years ago, and we stopped with that. We did that in these days because the last day, and particularly yesterday, there were some talks about feed restriction. I call it always a control amount of feed. It's the same, but it's more political. But when you have really old-fashioned feeding systems, slow speed, you know, running speed, you have an issue with body weight uniformity. Therefore, many places, they still use feeding programs, like skip a day, skip another day, 5-2-4-3, etc. But we need a modern feeder system. So, like a spin feeder, or invincible trough. And there is still a rule of thumb in practice. They say you need to feed the birds within 3 minutes. But I say nowadays birds, they changed over time, over decades. You've seen that information. You need to feed them within 3 seconds. So I mean, they need to have the feed all together at the same time, so they have access to the feed at the same time. That's important. And I always show this information from the beer and Craig Kuhn. He's in the back. He's still here. Thank you, Craig. But they already did a research here, published a research in 2007 about feeding programs and everyday feeding. You see it here on the table, everyday feeding, skip a day for 3 and 5-2. And the overall message is, of course, everyday feeding is good for behavior welfare, definitely, but it's also good for the farmer. You can see, if you use a feeding program, cost more feed. So I love this kind of information, and it fits very well in the buff approach, I call it. It's better for animal. Yes, it's better for animal to feed them every day, definitely. But it's also better for the farmer because it costs less feed. So, more information is available from Montiel, for example, but also recent studies in Athens by Gina Wilson. She retired, actually, one of the few broiler breeder researchers in the world, but she's still in the audience. Very good. But it also has a carryover effect, can have a carryover effect to the laying phase. And you see here the same very important and famous study of De Beer and Craig Kuhn. And you see, when you feed them every day, ED, you have at least numerical or significant higher production in eggs. So it definitely also affects these birds. And there is more information coming, for example, from Sweeney, and I'll only show you the information about body weight uniformity. But nowadays, if you feed them every day, in a good way, in a proper way, within a couple of seconds, you have a better body weight uniformity. This is really the opposite what we thought and experienced in the past. But also, this Sweeney, this girl, she also found that there was a difference in cut health, a higher villus height and deeper crib depth. So it also affects in that. There's more research necessary to understand what's really going on with everyday compared to feeding programs. But of course, at the end of the day, everyday feeding, it's better. I talk about the lower amount of feed you need, because what's happening when you do skip a day, you have a constant cycle of feeding and fasting. You feed them or you feed them not. So you have also a constant cycle of deposition and remobilization of nutrients. And of course, that's not 100% efficient. Okay, what I said, I love to be a researcher. I can go a little bit extreme, twice a day feeding compared to skip a day feeding. Sounds extreme, but if you think about it, and also about the ancestors of broiler breeders, the red jungle fowl, you probably know there's an old study, Colliers and Colliers, 1966, 67, I think. They observed the red jungle fowl in nature, in real life. And what they found, chickens from origin are active in the morning and the evening, in the afternoon, because during the day it's too hot, so they're active in the morning and the afternoon. So they feed and they drink in the morning and in the afternoon. So twice a day feeding, I think, fits much better to the original bird and also to the broiler breeder, still. I ran an experiment a couple of years ago. We did feeding frequency, so in the morning and in the afternoon, once or twice. We had diet density, diluted diets with oat hills, etc., with the Ross. It's the most common breed in our region, Northwest Europe, in small cages. But what I observed, and this was so interesting, never forgot the moment. You have some moments in life that you never forgot. Where was you, Rick, at that time? You know, assassination of Trump, the trying to do that, etc., the 9/11, etc. But I was in Denmark, and they give me the data, you know, about this, and I found out when you feed them twice a day, you have a better body weight uniformity. How is that possible? You expect the opposite. I did as well. Okay, we feed them within the 3 seconds, of course, so that helps. But what I think what's the mode of action was here, when you, after feed restriction, after ad lib feeding, 10 days, 40 days, you start feed restriction, or if you give them a controlled amount of feed, you have already bigger birds and smaller birds. Bigger birds have physical, because they have a bigger crop, and smaller birds has a smaller crop. So bigger birds has an advantage for feed intake. And particularly after that ad libitum period, when you start with feed restriction, the bigger ones can eat more. They can eat till they drop, you know. When you feed them twice a day, the smaller ones have the opportunity to feed themselves twice a day, more feed in total. I think that was the case. But this was interesting, and in a recent study we found this as well, so this is interesting. What we also found, tendency to higher egg production, tendency to earlier age of sexual maturity. What's 50% production? We count that, calculate that to that. But we also found this one, a tendency to higher fertility. So we feed these birds during the rearing phase twice a day, but we saw an effect during the laying phase, so carryover effect. How is possible? How is that possible? Probably something to do, but we didn't check that actually. But I can later to that, when you feed them twice a day during the laying phase, you change the behavior pattern, probably. And that's very important. You need to have active birds at the end of the day. I come later to that. Very recently, and it is just submitted, 6 weeks ago, to the Poultry Science Journal. We did an experiment, or Avigen did an experiment, and I helped them with some observations, etc. So we did it's in collaboration with Avigen between 0 and 20 weeks of age, but they keep them till 60 weeks of age, but I only will focus on the first period, the rearing period. We had 60 pens, 200 birds, pullets, and what we did, we had 4 treatments, the control treatments, just feeding them once in the morning at 7, and we had 20% diluted diet, once a day, 20% diluted diet, twice a day feeding, and we had an extreme diet, you could say, 30% diluted diet, fed twice a day. And we dilute that diet with straw pellets, already mentioned by Tim yesterday. And we fed them in the morning at 7, 50%, and at 11 at also 50%. And of course, they follow the same body weight profile. Body weight uniformity, I showed that research, that other research, what I found better body weight uniformity at 10 weeks of age, but we also saw that here, also at later age, we saw a better body weight uniformity here. Oh, where's the pointer? Here's the laser. Here you see a better body weight uniformity here between 6 and 15 weeks of age during the growing phase, during the developer phase, and overall we saw a better body weight uniformity. So twice a day feeding, improved, only 2 experiments, but you can say improved body weight uniformity. We also saw a lower mortality when we fed these birds twice a day, 20% or 30% diluted diet. This was particularly driven by a lower percentage of grading, and we saw of course, some difference in behavior. You have a different pattern, and that's the message. You have a different pattern. They are active in the morning, then they can rest, and they're active in the afternoon. So there's, of course, a difference in eating and drinking behavior. And there was also a lower incidence of stereotypic pecking behavior. And you know what stereotypic pecking behavior is? To empty feeder, to the walls, etc. But also to the tails of the birds. And you know, in breeders, what is very specific in broiler breeders, particularly in the pullet phase, but also in the beginning of the laying phase, you see that typical stereotypic pecking to the tail. It's very specific for broiler breeders. And there were more positive effects on behavior. Again, it's submitted to Poultry Science Journal, and hopefully It will be published in a couple of months. So you can read all the details. Come back to twice a day feeding during the laying phase. Again, really it fits more to the nature of the bird. Feed them twice a day. This research was carried out in the first place because we want to improve eggshell quality. Because if you look to the eggshell to the egg formation, we feed these birds normally a limited amount of feed in the morning. In the morning, the majority of the eggs are laid, 90%, 80%, depends on the age. The next ovulation of the yolk is within an hour. So after that, the bird developed the albumin. And for albumin, you need energy, you need protein, amino acids at the end of the day. But after that, in the afternoon, late afternoon, and particularly during the night, eggshell formation takes place. So if you look to that, you feed them in the morning, the nutrients, in particular for calcium, for the eggshell formation, calcium needs to be available during the night. And we do that in a different way. Again, we feed them in the morning. So therefore we thought, okay, we feed them twice a day, also during the laying phase, but more extreme, or not extreme, it's also used in layers, we use the method of split feeding. We run some experiments, a pilot experiment between 50, 60 weeks of age first, then we have a second experiment between 45 and 65 weeks of age. Normally we kept these breeders in the Netherlands, Northwest Europe, till 60 weeks of age, so this was more extreme, to more challenge them at a later age. And after that, of course, I want to implement it also in practice. I found a farmer stupid enough to do this, and he helps me in this, because all the research I do is quite applied, or very applied, but I really need to implement this kind of issues in practice. Otherwise, it's worthless. So, just an example of the experimental design. This was the second experiment. It's all published in Poultry Science Journal. Advertising, man. Okay. The first was the console, just feeding them in the morning, lights on 7, feed them on 7:30, twice a day feeding. So the standard breeder diet, also used in the console groups. We feed them at 7:30 and 16 hours or 4 p.m. So in a 50-50 deviation. And we use split feeding. That's the third group. So the same, feed them in the morning, in the afternoon. Very simple. This is, in brief, the diet. You know, you have a control diet, a standard diet, for that period of the laying period. We give them a morning diet. Again, you need to support albumin formation, so you need more protein, more amino acids, and of course some more energy and less calcium. During the afternoon, it's really in the opposite, because then you need more calcium for the night. That was the idea. So in average, you can calculate that, but on average, the nutrients for the morning and the afternoon diets were comparable with the control diet. To the results of the first two experiments, there was no effect on eggshell quality. That was a pity, but that's research. Egg production, we saw a tendency to higher egg production in both for the split feeding, especially for the split feeding. No effect on egg weights, no effect on incubation traits, and we saw an effect on water intake and of course water to feed ratio. That was lower for the twice a day and the split feeding, only in the second experiment. Something to do, I think, with the pattern, behavior pattern. Here you see an overview of the most important ones. Again, eating, drinking. Of course, when you feed them twice a day, the dashed line, they eat more in the afternoon, after the second feeding period, moment. And also they drink more. But more interestingly is the activity or the inactivity. You see here, these birds fed twice a day are more active at the end of the day. And I come later to that, why that is so important. When I come to the on-farm experiments, if you look to I collected data, of course, of these flocks as well. I couldn't visit them because of AI issues, but we saw a trend to higher fertility at 60 weeks of age in the first flock, using split feeding twice a day. And this farmer feed them 2:30 in the morning, 1:30 in the afternoon. I couldn't visit them again because of AI, but the farmer remarks me there were less females on the sleds during the afternoon because, you know, matings are performed on the litter. The sex is happening. More mixing and activity during the afternoon, and that's the most important period for mating. You have probably seen this graph before. It's an old study from Harris, somewhere in the 80s or 90s, 92 actually, and you see here very clear, if you look to the matings, percentage of matings during the day, 16 hours in that time, but nowadays it's 13 or 14, but at the end of the day, that is the most important part of the day for mating activity. So what you need is interaction, activity, because matings are performed not because they have a harem, definitely not, but because by coincidental meetings. How it works, I don't know, but I observed a lot, many times, mating behavior, and it just happened. Why? I don't know. It just happened. So they need to meet each other. So you need mixing, particularly at the end of the day, particularly when breeders become older, because it's the same as human. When they become older, they become more lazier. They're sitting, standing, doing nothing, you know. I have two videos about that. On the left, on the top, you see without feed. You can see the feeder line is up. And on the right, low, you see the feeder line is down. So they are fed. Look to the activity. Normal, there's also sound, but not today, maybe better. You can see this. I shoot this footage, what was it, around 58 weeks of age. And this is what you see at the end of the day in breeder houses. On the left up, they're just standing, doing nothing, you know. They're waiting for something. I don't know for what, but if you feed them, of course, they become more active, at least the females, but also the males. Some people said, oh, this is not great. You only feed the females, so they have feed, so it's terrible for welfare of the males, you know, because they have no feed. It is what it is, you know. They need to do the work. We feed the females, so they come downwards on the litter, and then mating's happening. I observed that in the second flock. Then it was allowed to visit the farm, and I saw much more matings during that time in that old flock, and that's the important part. Decreasing. It's all decreasing, people. Oh, it's a negative signal, but it is what it is. But what I also saw, I saw difference in behavior, mating behavior, and this is great, you know, because that definitely shows the effect, how it can work, you know. If you look to the successful and the failed matings, twice a day matings, more successful, but also more voluntary matings. And that helps the birds, and particularly the mating behavior issues. And that's a very positive. So, in general, what's the time, Bob? It's okay? 5 minutes ago? Okay, very good. Take-home message. Low male percentage improved the mating behavior, feather cover, and fertility. Yes, I observed that, and I think that's really the key for the future, because we are also in Northwest Europe facing about mutilation issue or stopping with that, particular with the hind toe. You know, we're still doing that in broiler breeding males. We clipping the hind toe, and we are facing a ban on that in a couple of years. So therefore, we really need to rethink the male management, and particularly the male to female ratio, to improve the mating behavior. Everyday feeding is more efficient. It's positive for welfare, yes, but it's also very positive for the farmer because it costs less feed. So really, again, in the buffer approach, it's It's better for the animal and the farmer. If you really want to implement positive management, then you need the buff approach, what I say. A farmer is willing to do when it helps him as well, you know, for performance. And I'm really looking for that kind of stuff, that kind of management issues. Twice a day feeding in my research improved body weight uniformity and reproduction. And that adjusted feeding strategy, what I did with Avigen, again, during the rear, improves welfare and production performance. And twice a day feeding during the lay influenced activity pattern. And again, that's important because mating activity needs to be done at the end of the day. Make them active at the end of the day. And with definitely positive effect on reproduction. Thank you for your attention.